What happened on election night? Where is American society going? I am joined by the amazing Molly Jong-Fast to help sort it all out. Welcome back to Defending Democracy. I'm Marc Elias. Let's get started. Welcome, Molly Jong-Fast, to Defending Democracy.
Hi, thanks for having me, Marc.
All right, so you are my first guest after the election. I knew immediately you were the person I needed to sort this all out with. So, what the hell happened?
So I just actually wrote a piece about all the stuff I got wrong.
That was very brave of you, by the way.
Yeah, oh, thank you. I mean, part of it is looking back at the last 6 months in a very clear-eyed way and looking at how I saw the candidates and how I saw the electorate and how other people saw the electorate and the ways in which I refused to see things that were obvious, like anger about different things. And again, they're not, like, I'm not even sure, like, the anger in the electorate, which really is real and clearly was real, and you could pin it to different things, like, but I think it's almost more relevant to just talk about it as anger, because if you look at the other sort of headwinds against incumbency through the world, it is a rage against the establishment. Now, whether it's a rage because of you could put any number of issues in there and they would be both right and wrong, right? Because that kind of rage is not, there's not one thing that is central to it. So there was a rage against incumbency, which I think came from a kind of anti-establishment, certain things maybe made people angrier, but it was rage. And so that was part of it. Then I also think my fundamental mistake was that I underestimated Donald Trump yet again. And it is so, like, in 2016, I underestimated him. Polls, which I hate, were actually underestimated Trump again.
Correct.
So they underestimated him in 2016. They underestimated him in 2020. And then again, they underestimated him.
Yes.
So, yeah, which is incredible.
And a fact, by the way, that people forget in 2020, they underestimated it. You know, a lot of people, particularly Democrats, we remember 2016, that it was a surprise. And we remember, now we know 2024 is a surprise. But actually, 2020 was a big miss he was much closer. I mean, Biden was up by 6, and in the end, it was like a squeaker. So I would say, I actually think polling is much better than I thought it was, much more accurate than I thought it was. Who knows how? Because I still don't understand how it works. And if you ask people to explain it to you, they won't, right? They'll be like, well, and you're like, huh? But the other thing that I think I really got, so I definitely got polling wrong. I was at an event at a college, which I was emceeing a panel. It was 2 pollsters, 2 students, and the head of a political organization. And at the end of the panel, I said, who do you think is going to win? And the pollsters, one of the pollsters does older people, one does younger people. And they both were like, you could tell they were like, they really didn't think she was going to win, but they said she was going to win because maybe I had beat them down, whatever it was. I mean, that's the thing, is like, so struck by like how much confirmation bias, like just being in an event, like there's so much pressure to just sort of to say the thing that everybody wants to hear. And then the 2 students were like, Trump's going to win. Interesting.
And I should have been like, oh shit. Yeah. Like that moment should have been the moment where I went, oh, that he's going to win. Like the fact that the 2 of them were like, he's going to win, that fundamentally, that should have been my moment.
Okay, so there were a number of reasons why, like I said, I had to talk to you. And I immediately told my team the day after the election, I'm like, I want to take a break. I want to digest this. And then I need to talk to Molly.
Right.
because number one, you are the most astute observer
Oh,
of
thank
politics
you.
in America right now. Like, I'll just
Thank
say
you.
it. Like, there
Oh,
are
wow.
not a lot of people who are getting things right and admitting what they
Well,
get wrong and
right.
looking forward. And so
Right.
that's one. But the second is you sort of occupy a lot of different spaces. Like,
Right.
one thing is you live in New York.
Right.
And so, like, I was genuinely surprised at looking at the New York, New Jersey
Oh, yeah.
returns. Like,
Yeah.
like Kamala won for sure,
Right.
but it
But it
was close. And like, what's that about? Like, is that like, describe the scene that is going on?
So I have a theory of the case there, which is I actually think that this goes back to underestimating Trump and not so much that. So, like, I think the brands are like this: Trump, Democratic brand, Republican brand. Like, I don't think, again, like, I think a thing that Trump did again in 24 that was really smart and everybody said he was dumb and it was really smart was going to the Bronx.
Huh. Tell people why that is, who are not from New York City, right? You have 5 boroughs. Manhattan is the big enchilada. Then you have Queens and Staten Island, Brooklyn, and the Bronx.
So what Trump did was he went to the Bronx and he did a rally, and it was AOC's district,
Got it.
which he way overperformed in. And then AOC asked her viewers or her Instagram followers why they supported
After
Trump.
the election, she did this.
And it was the same thing. You know, he supports working people like us. And so I think it was going to the Bronx was genius. I mean, look, I think the problem is really at the end of the day, voters want, and I think this is how you win elections in this new world. Trump went everywhere. He went on every podcast. He did he did 3 hours with Joe Rogan. He did Theo Vaughn. He did out, and it's not so much I mean, yes, those people have huge audiences. And so you get in front of those audiences, but it's also you just provide hours and hours and hours of tape. And so you think to yourself, and he happens to be, I mean, Trump's superpower is this. People like him when they talk to him. They think he's a regular guy. And then his real superpower is that nobody believes he will do any of the things he says he'll do. Right? They don't, because in some ways, in 2016, Democrats were too successful. He was not able to take away Obamacare. So nobody remembers exactly what John McCain did when he did that thumbs down. But what he did was save Obamacare.
Yeah.
And nobody remembers that. Everybody thinks like, so you have Democrats being like, we're trying to save something that people don't know can be taken away. And I think that was a really tough position to be in. Like, we're trying to give you a child tax credit, which you don't quite understand what it does, but we're telling you it's good for you. Like, I don't know that anybody, like, the whole idea that you're giving people stuff they don't want, right? Like, remember, who were the people who voted for Trump, right? It wasn't actually very rich people. I mean, there were certainly some very loud, very rich people, but largely the people who voted for him were non-college educated whites, non-college educated Hispanics, men, non-college educated white women, right? Like, those were his big groups. And that's most of the country, right? And so that ended up being for him a really, like, he won with those people. And so those are the people Democrats are like, no, we need to give you these things. We need to give you this and that and this. And these people are like, no, we're going to vote for Trump. So you obviously have a situation where Democrats have not correctly, right? I mean, like, no, I mean, so I do think it was sort of an impossible situation, but I do think Trump is really good at getting people to think that he's going to do this stuff and it's going to help them and hurt other people.
I'll be right back with more of my conversation with Molly Jong-Fast in a minute, but I want you to know that Democracy Docket will remain fiercely unapologetic, pro-democracy in the fights ahead. It is dedicated to one thing, making sure you are informed in what is happening to democracy and what is happening in court. Your membership helps make sure that that is possible by supporting its growing team of 16 people. Please take a minute now to join the premium membership program by clicking on the link above or in the show notes below. I have a friend in Democratic politics who is, a household name. I won't say who it is.
Right.
And he flagged for me like a month ago that what Trump did in 2016, which COVID prevented him from doing in 2020, but which he did again in 2024, is he was everywhere all at once. Mm-hmm. And Democrats continued to go from sort of large event to large event with nothing in between. So like there'd be like the debate and then there'd be nothing. Then there'd be a big rally. And then like it was sort of a peaks and valleys, which again is not a fault of the Harris campaign. I want to be clear. Like that is in some respects how campaigns have been done and what Hillary did in 2016. Whereas he's like in between things, he's like at a podcast, and we're all sitting there being like, he's saying all these stupid things. And what America realizes is he's there. He's like in their feeds. He's in their face.
Yeah. If you want to win the presidency, which maybe you don't, but if you want to, it's going to be a question of absolutely just being everywhere all the time. Right. And I don't know that it, because the thing is, the media bubble is such that you cannot, I actually thought what was interesting, I had an interesting point here, which was in 2016, Trump won by being on cable news all the time.
Right.
And there was a long conversation of should put him on cable? Should we not put him on cable? Should we cover the rally? Should we not cover the rallies? But the reality is, by 2024, he didn't need to be on cable news.
Correct.
Because if he went on Theo Vaughn or Joe Rogan, there'd be enough clips. So it wouldn't matter.
Right.
And so he didn't need to call in, because cable news didn't have the same kind of reach.
Right.
And that is true with a number of things, right? So I think it's quite interesting to find him in this moment where he's sort of been ahead of the zeitgeist at every point.
Yeah.
And I don't know, again, I don't know how this happened.
Yeah, I'll give you a good example. I think most people in the Democratic Party, most people in the left of center ecosphere thought that his performance around the McDonald's thing was buffoonish.
Right.
And it was brilliant. It was brilliant, right? I mean, because again, he was everywhere. He was handing out food. I remember people mocking him for delivering pizza to the fire stations, I think, or something, when he was in New York, and he was holding the box wrong or something. And we all thought this is
brilliant.
Yeah.
It spoke to working people, right? Now, I want to go to another thing, which I think is important. So in Arizona, okay.
Yep.
You had Carrie Lake, because I think this is important to sort of figure out what happened. You had Carrie Lake run as mini Trump. This was her fourth time, right? She's been doing this forever, right? She ran for governor. She lost. She said she won. She's running for Senate. She loses. She's, whatever. But Carrie Lake, what I am struck by with that case is you had people come out for Trump. They came out. They filled in the bubble for Trump. Yep. They waited online, and then they left the bottom of the ticket blank. They didn't even bother while they were there to vote for Carrie Lake.
Right. It's wild. So you mentioned the relative decline in influence of cable news, and that's obviously that's been a well-reported story by media reporters. Right. I don't need to jump into that. But you have a broader, what I thought is one of the smartest critiques more generally of the role of the mainstream media versus emergent media, and the like. Right. So walk people through that, because I think as we look both to what just happened, but also where we're going, I think that's really important.
Yeah. So Charlie Kirk in 2016 started Turning Point USA, or a little bit before that, and it started on Facebook. And he was able to grow enormous influence on Facebook.
And Charlie Kirk is a right-wing influencer, right?
Yes. Right-wing influencer, young guy, he's not, I mean, he's, as we've all just gotten older and older, but he's in his 30s or something, or maybe he's 40. So, and he grew this, whether organically or inorganically, I
Doesn't
cannot
matter.
speak to, but he grew it into being an enormous source of news for people. Now, Facebook sort of died, right? And people don't go to Facebook for stuff. And so he sort of moved to X, and then he moved to, and why I bring him up, besides the fact that I'm sure will have some job in Trump world or some very high level influence.
He'll be like the Secretary of Agriculture for all we know.
Running HUD or something. But the reason I bring him up is not so much because because it's about him, but it's about the idea of an influencer. So he went to X, he grew X, he started a podcast, he grew the podcast, he started YouTube, he grew YouTube. So it's like it is really what I think we are in now is a world where you have influencers. And some are journalists, some are thinkers, many are not, many are actors, or former models, or, very attractive. Some of them are very attractive, some of them are less attractive. And they have figured out a kind of, that they are trusted messengers. Like, for example, one of the things I think the Democrats got really wrong, Joe Rogan, you don't need a liberal Joe Rogan. You just need Joe Rogan, right? Like, Joe Rogan is not so right wing. I mean, he's very into like the fitness health space, which has been taken over by the right, but only because the left seeded it, right? I mean, that's the truth. And like a lot of these conservative influencers, they don't necessarily have such strong views. It's just that nobody has ever gone to them. I mean, like, Bernie went on Joe Rogan, and Joe Rogan was like, this is actually kind of what I want, right? Like working man stuff, populism. And then everyone got mad at Bernie for going on it, right? Like, no, you cannot have a purity test. Like, these are influencers. You need to get in front of their people, period, paragraph. And if they are not your people, that's okay, because you're trying to get to their people.
Right.
And I think that is the biggest, ultimately, problem is like, you have to go everywhere.
Right. So I have a broader critique, and you may not agree with this. So feel free to tell me where I'm wrong.
Yeah.
I think part of the problem is that large segments of the mainstream media have, for their own reasons, and some of them are good reasons and some of them are business reasons that are just economic driven. They have set up a gatekeeping role for themselves,
right?
To say, if you sit down with Fareed Zakaria, and by the way, I like Fareed Zakaria, so I'm not picking on it.
Yeah.
You are giving a legitimate news interview. Right. If, on the other hand, you sit down with Brian Tyler Cohn, you are not.
Right.
If you go on Fox News, you are dealing with a news outlet, one that we may not think is perfect. But if you go on Joe Rogan, you're doing something fundamentally different.
Right.
And I think that this idea between, the kind of gatekeeping New York Times, Washington Post, network news is a little precious. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, it's a little bit like, they think that they are the news media, and their job is in part to keep out the Joe Rogans of the world, to use an older generation, the Howard Sterns of the world, right? Like,
yes, you're totally right, but it doesn't matter because they've already won.
Right.
Like, Joe Rogan has 69 million followers, right? Like that interview that Trump did got 69 million, 100 million. I mean, it doesn't, Joe Rogan has won. It doesn't matter anymore. Like, it has been so, like, mainstream media doesn't need to worry about ceding to these people because they have ceded. It's over.
So what does that mean? So, like, what does that mean? Does that mean more Substacks? Does that mean more podcasts? Does that mean more YouTube channels? Does it mean the mainstream media is like needs to retool, or you just think the fight's over? So, like, what are we even talking about?
It means that if you're listening to this and you're a smart liberal, you should get a podcast and get going and start a Substack and get going. Like, I do not think that I think what's amazing about this moment, and I say this as someone who comes from, I'm going to tell you a story, which is very relevant, I think, to this. So, when I was young,
You're still young.
90s, I'm 46.
That's
when
young.
I was in my
That's
20s, when I was like young and people would say I was young and I'd be like, oh, fuck you. Like now I'm like, yes, I am young. When I was in my 20s, I wrote a whole piece for a magazine that was this, and I went back and I did edits and I was going to get all this money. And in the end, the editor and chief was like, oh, I don't feel it. And they killed it, and I got a big check. And I was devastated, but I got a big check. And because I had a pay or play fee or something. And that does not exist anymore, right? Like that, there are no gatekeepers, right? You put your hand on a rock and you want to be Fareed Zakaria, you probably won't be, but you could, right?
Good.
It's not impossible. And so the good news is there are no gatekeepers, right? You are not going to spend 5 months working on a piece only to have an editor be like, we're not doing that this month.
Right.
But the bad news is there, you have people on the internet saying things that are not true very loudly.
Absolutely.
To millions of people.
Yes.
And that is the problem. But yeah, I mean, I think at this point, there is not, look, the New York Times is the New York Times, and will always be the gold standard. But I think everything else it's pretty, I mean, I think that I don't think there's anyone to stop people.
Yeah, I would say that the New York Times is the New York Times and it's in a different category. I agree with you. Though even the New York Times is increasingly relying on puzzles and recipes.
Right.
I mean, let's be clear. The New York Times has some structural advantages for sure, but it's not exactly, Barry Weiss leaves the New York Times, and I'm not a huge Barry Weiss fan, but she leaves the New York Times. She's got a pretty successful gig going on. Yeah. Even there. So I can't miss this moment with you,
right?
Because you're going to give me guidance here. So,
oh, good.
First, I'll say I was early in this respect. I got off Facebook before it hit its decline. I got onto X, or I still call it Twitter.
Right. Yeah.
Then I was quick to get on Post. So Post is no longer with
Post is dead.
Okay. Yeah. Then I was quick to get on Threads, and I built like a little bit of a community on Threads.
Yeah.
And that seems to not be going so great because it seems like Mark Zuckerberg is not
very conflicted about news.
I built Democracy Docket as an independent. It's not on Substack, but it's got its own thing, and we built this podcast and YouTube channel, and that's great.
Right.
So now Blue Sky, here I am. I am now, like a shill for my Blue Sky account.
Right. It's very good.
Do you think there becomes another dominant? Is there another X, or is X just X? You know what I mean?
I think it's going to be Blue Sky, probably. That's my guess. So what happened is interesting. Twitter, it's unusable. The bots, the this, the that, it's unusable.
I'm with you.
I mean, it's just, I like it. I'll use it for as long as it exists, but it's unusable. So Threads, very nice, weirdly laid out. And also I just want to say something.
They don't want political content.
Twitter existed, the way Twitter got big was on free writing. From writers. Right. That was what it was. You free writing, free writing. That was what it was. Free writing grew a tech company. The tech company then got sold to an oligarch. Okay. Then the oligarch was like, we don't need writers. We're going to do all our own news. Okay. So that's what's happening there. Threads, I think Mark Zuckerberg doesn't want to fight with anyone. He just wants to surf and build a new community and not have to deal with people. Okay. So he doesn't want news, doesn't prioritize links, doesn't want to give you any of the things you want social media for. fine, but then you're not going to have the free work. And so Blue Sky it doesn't have Nazis, or it doesn't have gleeful people who want you to die and telling you should die. And then it also is just much more, it doesn't feel like anybody's got their finger on the scale.
Yeah.
So I think that'll be the new thing. And I mean, it's more decentralized. So the idea, look, the fundamental problem we're having right now in American media is who owns what.
Correct.
And how will they be punished by the Trump administration?
Right.
So with Blue Sky, no one owns Blue Sky, and it's totally decentralized, and no one can be punished. So there's a question here, which is, the more media moves into not being, just being a person and not being a conglomeration and not being, the person who owns Blue Sky doesn't also own, a space travel company, right? And need Trump to like them. And I think that's where we're headed.
Okay, so you pivoted to the last topic I wanted to cover with you with the little time we have remaining. It was like a very Molly in the moment kind of thing. Like it was like, by the by, Trump may retaliate against people.
Oh, yeah,
so maybe we should pause on that for a moment, Molly. You have a grandfather who
went to jail.
Yes. So
by Republicans have a long history of putting my family in jail. Yes.
Exactly. So maybe we should just take a moment here to unpack how extraordinary it is that you can say as like in the passing, like, oh, and by the way, they may go after people. Like, what do you think happens?
So, I mean, again, here are two of my biggest problems as a thinker. One is that I'm a little bit optimistic.
Okay,
because
good.
I grew up with a lot of advantages. So that makes me always think, I have that happy optimism that very overprivileged people have. Like, things could work out. They have worked out for me with all my advantages. So I don't have the lived experience of someone who has faced terrible, discrimination. And so I'm always a little optimistic, which is probably my detriment. But what I would say is, and the other problem for me is, like, I really am not good at telling the future. But I do think, look, Trump has been elected. He won, and he won all the swing states, right? Yeah. He won. So in that way, he definitely, there was no cheating. He won. And it's, to quote Joe Biden, you can't only love democracy when you win. Right. You have to be all in on this no matter what. So, I don't know how it's going to go. I do know that he has a coalition that is very fragile. That includes people like RFK Jr. and also, I mean, it's just people with very different wants from him, and Elon Musk, right? This actually goes back to what we're talking about with mainstream media. What we see with mainstream media is that the brands are not as important as the people.
Right.
So, like, the brand of the news company, with the exception of the New York Times, right? The New York Times, for whatever reason, that brand still is humongous. It's just enormous. So, but everywhere else, I think maybe the Washington Post, maybe, I don't know. I'm not even sure. But everywhere else, it's the people, right? So why Barry Weiss was able to leave the New York Times was because she was Barry Weiss. So Barry Weiss at the Free Press, nobody gives a shit about the Free Press. They give a shit about Barry Weiss's organization. So I think that what Trump did that was smart was he put together a group of personality cult people. So it's him, it's RFK Jr., which is how he picked up a lot of non-college educated women, white women, I think, is this anti-vax, because RFK Jr. has this anti-vax stuff really appeals to women. I bet you his following is more women than men. That's my Yes, because he does fitness stuff, which also
Yes,
appeals
yeah.
on the right. But I think it's that. And remember, a lot of these right wing influencers do fitness stuff, which is like they sell fitness stuff, and on the left or in this sort of whatever we are, we all like. There was a lot of making fun of these right wing influencers for their fitness
Yes,
stuff, for
yes.
selling fitness
Yeah.
stuff, but actually was kind of brilliant, right? Because A, they bankrolled themselves, and B, they connected with a group that was looking for a political, a sort of political way to go. And they went right, that group, which, I mean, does fitness and health make a lot of sense with right wing
Donald Trump.
politics? Right. I mean, it doesn't make any sense, but it was offered to them, so they took it. And Democrats never offered anything to them. I mean, that's the other thing, is if you don't offer people stuff, they don't come to you.
Yeah.
And if you offer them complicated tax benefits that they don't understand, I don't know that does anything for you. But anyway, so the last thing I would say is he's got it's a cult of personality with a couple of other cult leaders. I don't know how you get all those people together, and I don't know the Venn diagram of all their wants if that works.
Molly Jong-Fast, thank you for joining me today. Thank you for everything you do. Thank you for speaking out and continuing to be a voice of reason and sanity and explanation in a very complicated and unmoored world right now. And thank you for joining me on Defending Democracy.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Defending Democracy. Make sure you're subscribed to Democracy Docket's free daily and weekly newsletters. We'll see you next time. Defending Democracy is a production of Democracy Docket LLC.